Welcome to the Conversation in Review. In today's edition, we'll look back at some of the hot topics discussed this past week. The Nigeria Cricket Federation has embarked on a program to build 2 international standard cricket pitches at the Abuja National Stadium. The aim is to encourage foreign federations to tour the country and to explore the commercial potential of Africa's biggest sports market.
In an ambitious plan to raise the country's cricketing profile with a single event, Nigeria's National Sports Commission flagged off construction of 2 international standard cricket pitches on Saturday. The pitches, which the National Cricket Federation (NCF) says will be completed within 3 months, are being built to boost Nigeria's chances in a bid to host a Cricket World Cup in the near future.
This is the foundation for development of any sports infrastructure. Internationally acclaimed standard infrastructure, and that's what we have done today. This infrastructure will trigger sports in Nigeria, will trigger employment of youths, and trigger commercialization of these sports as well in Nigeria. You cannot do any of this if you don't have grounds.
Nigeria, which is well known for its obsession with football, is not known for its cricket, but Onyama believes that the country is ripe for the sport. The prospect of such grounds, according to Onyama, has attracted much international attention from some of the world's leading cricketing nations seeking partnerships with Nigeria.
We have gotten letters from a lot of countries, India, Australia, even England, of their interest to partner with us in playing cricket in Nigeria, which means that after this game is built, after this ground is completed, you are going to be seeing a whole lot of invitational cricket tournaments from a host of these countries that you people see on TV coming to play here, and that will increase tourism, sports tourism, thereby also create money for the Nigerian economy.
If Nigeria's bid to host a Cricket World Cup is successful, it would make it the 4th African nation to do so. The tournament was co-hosted in 2003 by South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya.
Okay, that was Emeka Onyama there of the Nigeria Cricket Federation, showing an example of how countries themselves can, I suppose, address the issue and create the right framework for the right sort of tours and whatever to happen. But Arjun, talking about tours, one thing we have talked about, and it's not just within Africa, you look at Pakistan, who are now playing most of their cricket outside the UAE, because there's societal issues, especially look at Kenya, you look at Zim having to travel to play Pakistan next month in the UAE. It's more the case that actually getting the right level of competition and getting the heroes and the stars of the game to come into your country to play, putting aside all the other issues, that seems to be something that no one is really able to address as far as cricket within Africa at the moment.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, it's quite hard. For Kenya, for example, if you want to really get bums on the seats in the cricket stadiums, you have to bring in the likes of the Indian players. You bring in Sachin Tendulkar, you'll see a full ground. You bring in the Pakistani players, you'll see a full ground. But getting them over here, I think the way things are going, it's all become about money as well. Kenya would never be, or Cricket Kenya, with what they're given from the ICC, they don't really have many sponsors here in Kenya. They would never be able to afford such things. So if Nigeria are getting there, then good on them, man. Good on them, and I wish them good luck.
Now, I mean, even if Nigeria was to invest all this time and effort in developing and delivering a stadium in 3 months, which would be one hell of a feat. But even if they were to do that, and even if they were to remove the issue of whether or not they get enough tours, the plans of the ICC themselves, especially with regards to the World Cup, surely they're the biggest hamper for the growth of the game, because they're now looking to turn the World Cup into a closed shop. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Well, the ICC just want to keep their 8 original members in the World Cup and then bring in 2 associates, which are more likely would be Ireland and maybe the Netherlands or Scotland or any of those upcoming countries, and they want to basically leave everyone else out. But I have big issues with that. You can't call it a World Cup if the countries around the world are not taking part in it. They're not only taking part, fine, they do have the associate qualifications for the World Cup, but even with the associate countries, you only have around 12 or 14 all around the world. If you look at the Football World Cup, every single region around the world has qualifiers, then they play against another region. So you deserve to be there. You shouldn't just be walking in knowing every 4 years that you're going to be, qualifying for a World Cup. So the ICC, I think, in this have lost a plot.
Let's row back a second, because I mean, obviously, the thing is, anytime you speak to anybody about the plans of the ICC to do that, everybody reacts the same way you just done, which is it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
I mean, they've obviously got some logic behind them. I mean, have you had a look at why? I mean, what is their argument for doing it this way?
Look, it's not about the argument. At the end of the day, it's all about money. The ICC is like a business. They know that with India, they've got 1 billion cricket followers, so India have to be one of the top teams. Then, of course, wherever around the world you have your big teams, New Zealand, Australia, there are a lot of cricket followers there. So they know that if they stick with these few teams, they will get X amount whenever the World Cup comes around. But they forget that if they stick that way and they don't send enough money down to the youngsters, you're just going to be stagnant at the end of the day. You might as well just every year have a cup between all these teams, and then the winner is a winner. The World Cup is losing its charm during the World Cup. I mean, in India and Sri Lanka, we saw Ireland beating England, and the associates were pulling off surprises.
That was what I was going to say to you, because surely the World Cup, yes, it is a bit of a long World Cup in terms, and that probably could be addressed in terms of maybe playing. It is only 50 overs, maybe part of the test for the top team should be playing more matches throughout the week. But one cannot get away from the fact that some of the most exciting and uplifting matches at the World Cup involved associate nations, either, as you say, beating England, which has been par for the course for at least one associate nation at every World Cup. But I mean, as a product, that was what made the product, because towards the end, apart from everyone loving New Zealand and Brendan McCullum, it was the usual suspects at the usual stages, surely.
Exactly. I mean, when you have a World Cup and you have these associate nations, they want to go out onto the big stage and prove that they might be called minnows. And I really hate that term, minnows. They might be the minnows, but they've still got the talent and they can still perform at the end of the day. And when you're looking at these people who, for 4 years, they just plan, hoping that they make that big stage and prove to the world that we've got talent and we can do it. When you lock them out of a competition like this, that's totally unfair, and it's just wrong.
So, stern criticism of the International Cricket Council's plans to limit the amount associate nations going to the Cricket World Cup. Such plans would surely discourage ambitious federations like Nigeria if the status quo remained the same. Time now for a break, but when we come back, we discuss arguably the most potent front three in world football. Welcome back. Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Samuel Eto'o, Romario, Johan Cruyff. There's no doubting that some of the biggest strikers in world football have played for the Catalan giants Barcelona at the Nou Camp. But in Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez and Neymar, the Spanish league leaders have arguably the most potent strike force in a generation.
"102 goals, Ahi."
I mean, the thing that's more amazing for me, because Barcelona have previously had a trio that scored 100 goals. It involved Africa's own legendary Samuel Eto'o, playing up front with Henry, and I think it was Messi at that time. But that was over a course of a season. Now you're looking at this number of goals where Suarez wasn't available as part of that triumvirate for most of the start of the season, but Suarez is always banned at the start of the season, so I guess not so much of a surprise. But it's also the quality of goals and the fact that they're coming off last season, they had a lot of questions to answer. Atletico had won the league, Real Madrid had won the Decima and won the European Cup. So I guess for that triumvirate to really stand out and pull the club through has been spectacular, and it really has been difficult to pick who is more influential over the course of the season, because Suarez has come with the goals. Neymar's filled in when Suarez wasn't there. He's as good as Messi in some situations. So it's a really fantastic achievement.
And I think the scary thing with those three is that all three of them have come together and they're super fit right towards the end of the season, and there's no slowing down.
There's absolutely no slowing down. I mean, if you look at the top of the league and now, Real Madrid are 2 points behind them. Atletico Madrid, reigning champions, are further back and probably out of the race. So we're back into the usual two-horse race. But the team spirit, the camaraderie is clearly stronger at Madrid. Those three players seem to be playing for each other, whereas anyone who even watched Madrid last night, for instance, would have seen Cristiano Ronaldo upset because a teammate scored when he could have scored. And I think it's just, they embody that very more than a club ethos that Barcelona have.
How many lessons do you think that someone like Suarez has taken from the Premier League to the Spanish La Liga?
It's difficult to say. I think in the Premier League, there's obviously a greater degree of physicality. And if you look at Suarez's style of play, he's very aggressive with defenders when they're on the ball. And beyond that, also, he's probably lost some of that diving element that he brought in. And I think what defenders, and I've watched a couple of Barcelona games, and I've seen a couple of times where he's taken a hit, and it's almost like the defenders expect him to go down, but he battles on. So whether that's because of the Premier League or whether that's actually he's just a tough South American hombre and he's playing his natural game, I don't know. But definitely the never say die attitude of the Premiership is there. But then you look at it, I mean, Barcelona, do they really have much to learn from the Premier League? I'd argue over the last few years, probably not much. I think the Premier League has a lot more to learn from them, if I'm honest.
So Barcelona, you'll know they're going into quite another big match now in the Champions League, and they're going to be facing Bayern.
Yes.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal because it's the return of Pep. It's his former... I mean, essentially, it's where he was made and where he probably remade a club to where he's actually completely rebranding and repositioning a club like Bayern. So the challenge is there. I mean, who wins? I don't know. For me, with the front three of Messi, Suarez and Neymar, even if you stopped two, whoever's left can do so much damage on their own to any team in any level of the game that you can't look really beyond Barca walking through the stage.
We're going to have a look a bit more at Bayern now. In fact, Gabon's Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang scored a 75th minute equaliser as Borussia Dortmund ended Bayern Munich's quest for a treble just last night. And after finishing 1-1 at the end of extra time, Dortmund went on to win the penalty shootout 2-0 to advance to the final of the German Cup. So Bayern, almost the equivalent to Chelsea, they were chasing title after title this season, but Borussia Dortmund have stopped that now. What do you think about that?
I think I always think it's quite unlucky for Bayern because I think, to be fair, Bayern are in essentially a one-horse race of a league. I think if they really want to make it interesting, they should probably think about not buying players from the closest rivals, especially Dortmund. But it was just interesting. I think at the moment they've already won the league title. They're saving themselves possibly for a showdown with Barcelona, which is obviously a two-legged affair in the Champions League. But for Dortmund, I think with Klopp leaving, I think there's probably just emotionally a bit more riding on that game. And you could really see it when you watch the way the players chase through to the end. It wasn't just Aubameyang. Right across the team, the Dortmund boys were really going for it. And I felt that at one point the Bayern guys, probably with an eye to taking on the team we've just spoken about, Barcelona, were probably just saving themselves towards the end. And also they've just not had to raise their game that often when facing German opposition all season. And
it's interesting you say that the Bundesliga could be more exciting. What else would you do to make it more exciting?
Well, I mean, the thing is, from everything we see that the Bundesliga, often in European football, is held up as a good model. Tickets are accessible to most fans, pricing is fairer. Even Bayern only have 12 sponsors as opposed to like a Man United that has probably 12 per country around the world. So it's seen as this much more egalitarian, but it isn't, because actually what happens is every time you get a look at Lewandowski, other players, once you're good in any other team in Germany, you get bought. Mario Götze was the same. So what would I do? I guess I'd pray, if I was a German fan, I'd pray for an oligarch to come into a team like Dortmund, give them a lot of money that he doesn't feel he wants to spend before he passes away, and hope that you can buy in the players. But generally, I think it's quite established, and I don't think there's any silver bullet that's going to make it more interesting. You saw what Klopp managed to do with Dortmund, to take them to challenge Bayern over 2 years, but then you saw that Bayern's response was just to buy their best players. Yeah. So unless you're going to stop Bayern and restrict that trade or restrict that access, I don't really see what the solution is.
It's quite a tricky one, isn't it? And let's speak a little bit about Klopp and he's leaving now. What do you think that's going to change?
I think it's going to make the league. Well, I think it's actually going to make the Bundesliga a bit less interesting, because he was, as an individual, he was a real conductor of media attention, and he was a real star in the league. Despite the way his team played, even against Arsenal and people like that, he said he prefers rock and roll to the classical styles of the big teams in Europe. So he had a real attitude, and maybe. For me, I'd like to see him in the Premiership. I know that we're going to talk about Liverpool in a bit, but that's where I'd like to see him, because I really think that whether or not the teams do well in Europe, the Premiership as a league is the best league, because the bottom can beat the top. Teams play for 90 minutes. It's blood and thunder. It's all go, and I think it will really suit him.
So, Ehi Elonge has joined the chorus of voices that would like to see Jurgen Klopp manage in the English Premier League. Another factor in his favour is that he speaks good English, which will make employing him attractive to many clubs. After the break, we find out which team or teams could benefit from his services. Welcome back. Now, Liverpool's midweek defeat away to Hull has all but dashed their hopes of a top 4 spot. After pushing Manchester City so close in last season's title race, it was believed that they could again mount a strong challenge for the title. But with the sale of their top marksman Luis Suarez to Barcelona and an injury-ravaged season for Daniel Sturridge, they find themselves in 5th place, 7 points behind Manchester United in 4th.
Hey, Liverpool fans are not happy. Why aren't they happy? What's the problem?
Well, I mean, let's first start on the pitch and look off the pitch. On the pitch, they've spent 100 million plus since the sale of Suarez. And I know Sturridge's injury has been key. He's out for the rest of the season. So they haven't really been able to replace that firepower. Balotelli hasn't worked. Lovren and some of their bigger signings haven't gelled. And ironically, 2 years ago, when talking about Tottenham, their manager, Brendan Rodgers, says, if you spend 100 million and don't make the Champions League, serious questions need to be asked. And now he finds in that situation, suggesting no one asks him any questions. It's all in line. So that's what's happening on the pitch. But off the pitch, it's not just Liverpool fans. I think right across the Premier League, in fact, maybe the top 2 divisions in English football, and bearing in mind what we just said about Bundesliga, the fans are really feeling the squeeze. And, the average cost of attending a game, if you've got a family, is now rocketed. So with 2 children, you're looking at £200-300, including travel, especially for away days. So they're looking for assistance from a league which is making so much money from television. Yeah. And the fans' argument is that apart from what happens on the pitch, the noise they make off the pitch, the atmosphere in English stadia is part of what makes the game attractive. Absolutely. So if clubs aren't going to look after them, then they're going to have to play in front of empty stadia. And then you only have to look at Serie A for what happens when fans get turned away from the game to see the real danger that if the Premier League doesn't react.
And we saw that just very briefly in some of the tweets. They say they're supporters, not customers. They called the boycott of not going to that game a success. Now, West Ham have very recently lowered the price of their season ticket once they move into the Olympic Stadium. Should other clubs be taking that stance?
Well, ironically or strangely, West Ham did get some heat for doing that from other clubs, because the club suggested that if you move into a subsidised stadium, then it's very easy to lower seats. And also, West Ham probably don't have, which is probably disparaging to West Ham. I know a lot of Hammers fans, but they suggested West Ham don't have enough fans to fill that stadium in regularly. So that's part of what they're doing. But yes, of course, if you're going to sign that sort of deal, you need to look after your fans, and you need to have a pricing system that rewards fans either for turning up or is weighted to sort of games. But I guess fans are just complaining because in life, as in football, they're generally feeling the squeeze. And a football club isn't an experience for these guys. It's part of their day. You know, they live and breathe the club, probably even more so than some of the club owners do. For him, it's just an investment. You look at arguably Mike Ashley up in Newcastle, pretty much treats it as an advertising space as opposed to a club that he's really nurturing. So that might be part of the problem.
And we've got an issue now. Of course, Liverpool aren't going to hope. Well, they might not make the Champions League.
They will not.
Okay, I was trying.
They will not
trying.
make the Champions
They're not
League.
going to play in Champions League next year. The supporters again is something they're not going to be happy about.
I've got two words for those Liverpool supporters: Jurgen Klopp. That is the answer to your problems. Because even if you don't make the Champions League, it's a fresh start. Because Rodgers is good. I mean, Brendan Rodgers is good, and he's pushed the club quite far. He's revolutionised it. He's stabilised it, and he's revolutionised it on-field play, and worked very close with his owners from the Northeast Sports Network, the Americans who own the club, to really help re-commercialise and give it a breath of fresh air. But now you've got to start winning. Yeah. And I just have this feeling that Brendan Rodgers, great guy, but I think he's got to the level he can with that club, unless he's given, again, another massive amount of money to spend.
So we know your stance. Brendan Rodgers out, Jurgen Klopp in. Wow. And finally, Kalusha Bwalia, head of Football Association for Zambia, led other soccer-loving Zambians in laying refs at the graveside of departed players in Lusaka, added that the pain of losing the entire team in the airplane disaster of 1993 will remain forever. Soccer fan and resident Jeffrey Ziambo had this to say.
They died in service, so it's important that they are remembered because they brought glory to Zambia, and they were in the national team. And for the sake of our records and our history as a country, and for those that were not there at that time, it's important that such events are there so that they know exactly what happened during that time. So government needs more involvement.
Now, Ahi, you know, it's still a very sad situation. It's 22 years now gone, and it was a terrible, terrible disaster. And as we just heard on the VT there from Jeffrey, it's something that should be remembered. What do you think about all of this?
Again, you're completely right. It is a very sad situation that happened, and I know it was back in '96. And when it happened, it was a real shock. I mean, it wasn't the first time. Probably for me, you know, and some Man United fans out there might remember, you know, the '58 and whatever else. But it was a real shock because it was tied into international football. It was an entire team, apart from Kalusha, who was flying in from Europe and not from Zambia to Senegal at the time. And I know that there's some tension with the government, but I think the focus, which some people are trying to bring it to, is about continuing to support the commemoration of the event. And whilst I understand fully, and in some ways support the government, saying, look, this is now a private family affair, you know, you guys commemorate as you want. I don't think the government should be allowed to do that until they publish a report into what actually happened, because this was a government plane, it was a military plane, it was a government-sanctioned flight, and you've done the investigation, and it was 22 years ago. So with the passage of time, if you want to pull out of it as a government, you have to make sure that people know what happened.
Yeah, and that much I understand, but do we ever feel we'll, you know, without getting too political, do we ever feel we'll get that report?
I don't think so, because it was a military plane, it was a different time, it was a different government, and you know, there's so many conspiracy theories that have been flying around about this issue that I really think that the government, in order to lay it to rest, either has to make somebody accountable and has to have a straw man for everybody to point out and go, it was your fault, which might offer the family some closure. But you know, you're looking at it even in British football with the Hillsborough disaster being reinvestigated in British football, that sometimes the passage of time doesn't actually afford any greater clarity. And what people want is closure. What the families want is closure, which is just to know why, or at least as close to the truth as they can. And I think it's up to the government to provide that for them.
But the government so far have only really paid them half of the compensation that they've been, you know, offered. Why do you think that is?
Unfortunately, there's a few general trends that run through any sort of government-private sector relationship, not just in Africa, in any government in the world. And why that is, again, the government has to explain. We will speculate whether it's corruption, we will speculate whether somebody's hiding something or whatever. But again, it's just, you've got to, I'm almost, from my position, my advice to the Zambian government, if you're watching, is it's not about the general fan, it's not about the others, it is about the families of these guys who passed away. And you've got to make sure that you do, it's not that many people, you're not having to look after 1 million families. It's the families of those guys who looked away. Give them what they do, give them the truth, and after that, how they choose to address that it's up to them. It's not about the wider community at this point. You've really got to address the needs of those families.
So a difficult situation for the families of the victims involved, who just want closure for the accident, which claimed the lives of their loved ones. Let's hope that one day in the near future, the Zambian government will release the findings of the report to bring an end to 22 years of hurt.